If you haven't had time to play all the JRPGs that were released in 2026 so far, but want to know which ones are worth your time, well, you're in luck, because I've played them all. Well, most of them anyways. So in this video, I'll be sharing what I think are the best JRPGs of 2026 so far, starting with our first game, People of Note. People of Note is an incredibly earnest game. The developers have a deep love for music, and it shows in every aspect of this game. You play as Cadence, who's trying to compete in a music competition, but there's one problem. She was rejected from joining, so she sets off on a journey to learn about various musical styles, to form a band, and rejoin the competition. Everything about the game revolves around music, from themes of various towns you visit, to punny musical names for enemies, and your attacks are even on musical stanzas. If you're big into music, you'll appreciate all the little puns and references this game has to offer. A particular favorite of mine was a dungeon called World's Generation in the K-pop district of your hometown, a clever reference to my all-time favorite K-pop group, Girls' Generation. Combat itself is turn-based and requires timed button presses for the best damage. In a way, it sort of feels like a music rhythm game, which fits well thematically. Combat is quite fun, and there's a lot of customization in equipment and abilities. There's even cool team-up attacks that blend music genres when your meter is full enough. The game also features puzzles, and some of them are super satisfying to solve, and others can be a little frustrating. And the developers obviously heard this feedback in playtesting because they added a setting where you can essentially turn them off. In a game all about music, the music in the game is phenomenal. All the tracks are well composed and catchy, and the game itself has a nice stylized look. Nothing you haven't seen before, but it's done well. The only real problem I had, and why it's not higher on this list, is the pacing. Near the end of the game, everything starts to get a little samey. Too many battles and puzzles that really drag. The game took me about 15 hours to finish, but it really could have been done in around 12 hours. I think People of Note is still worth playing, but just play it in shorter bursts and you'll be fine. If you like Paper Mario, Escape from Ever After is probably a game you'll want to check out. It has a really clever premise, and the game overall is just super well made. You start the game as the hero named Flint Buckler off to slay a dragon, but upon arriving at his castle, it's been turned into a lifeless corporate office. The company's CEO, Mr. Moon, realizes that fairy tales can be exploited for cheap labor. In order to take them down, Flint decides to travel to the worlds of various fairy tales, recruit characters, and take down Ever After Inc. once and for all. The story is so tongue-in-cheek and well told. It flips famous fairy tale characters around in fun and unexpected ways that I'll let you discover for yourself. But the combat is really where it's at. It's turn-based and, like Paper Mario, timing-based, both on offense and defense. You'll have to tap at just the right time or hold a button until the right moment on offense and block just before getting hit on defense. There's all kinds of fun quirks to combat, like the dragon needing to burn wood shields with fire before you're able to do real damage, or topple enemies that are stacked on top of each other. What's neat is you can swap characters from the back and front lines, or even in and out of the party at will. However, you can only have 2 active party members at any given time. The game also has occasional puzzles where you have to use your various character abilities, but they're relatively simple and never frustrating. Visually, the game looks awesome, super charming and colorful, and it really nails that Paper Mario aesthetic. It also has this wonderful upbeat jazz soundtrack that really creates a fun vibe. It'll take you around 20 to 25 hours to finish, and I genuinely think it's worth every penny. I had an absolute blast with it. Dragon Quest VII Reimagined has been the absolute best JRPG comfort food. Turn-based combat, world maps, exploring new worlds, good stuff. And this reimagined version is by far the best way to play Dragon Quest VII. I've tried both the original PS1 and 3DS remake versions, and both bored me to tears. But Reimagined has added so many quality of life and visual upgrades to bring the game to new heights. Firstly, the story has been completely streamlined and cut a lot of the fluff stories that made the original feel bloated. The story is essentially a collection of mini-stories. You and your friends Kiefer and Maribel want to go on an adventure, and you leave your little island, but after discovering an ancient temple, it sends you to the past to restore various parts of the world that you can later travel to when you go back to your own time. The game itself is fairly easy, always telling you where to go, where treasures and secrets are, and really puts up a challenge on the normal difficulty. But honestly, I kind of like this more breezy approach. It was more about the adventure and the good vibes, and Dragon Quest always nails that. Combat is of course turn-based, and all the characters have their own special abilities. What's nice is that you can speed up the combat to make it more tolerable, and in fact, once you're high enough level, you can just hit enemies before you swirl into the little battle arenas. Visually, the game features a top-down isometric perspective, and characters have this sort of doll-like visual style that I think looks really nice. The soundtrack also has been wonderfully remastered. However, much like People of Note, the game gets kind of samey after a while, and the big core story beats are a little further out than I would have liked. That said, if you pace this game out instead of trying to no life it, then I think it's really enjoyable. It also clocks in at a much more manageable 40 to 50 hours instead of the 100+ hour monster that was the PS1 version. If you like classic JRPGs, you absolutely shouldn't miss this. While more of an action-adventure game in the vein of Zelda than a JRPG, I think The Adventures of Elliot caught most JRPG fans' eyes, so I wanted to include it. I've been really enjoying this game. I haven't beat it quite yet, but after putting a dozen or so hours in, I'm confident in recommending it. In the game, you play as Elliot, who is, you guessed it, an adventurer. He does various odd jobs around town, and one day the king sends him on a task that sends him through time. And that's a huge part of the game, constantly swapping between the various time periods. Unfortunately, it feels like retreading old ground and going to the same locations instead of fresh new ones, but they are different enough to keep exploring enticing. Now, I'll say the core story itself isn't amazing, but there are some real gems in the various character side stories that I really loved. But the real draw of this game, and a huge aspect of it, is the exploration. As you're walking around the world, there's dungeons, caves, and challenge dungeons everywhere. You'll be constantly exploring to find new equipment and collecting shards of life to permanently increase your health. And the game has a great map, so you always know where you need to go next, what hasn't been explored, and what other items you might have missed. It feels really satisfying when you find something new, encouraging even more exploration. And the game's action combat is kind of simple, but there's a lot of weapons that make it feel super fun. You have 3 ranged and 4 melee. You got a sword, spear, hammer, and this sort of like sickle that you can swing around, and you have a bow, boomerang, and bombs. And what's nice is you can actually find better ones throughout the game that get stronger. And you can also equip magicite to your weapons to grant extra effects and increase stats. Your fairy companion Faye also grants you magical abilities like being able to sprint, warp across different paths, and lighting things on fire. People complain about her a lot, that she was kind of annoying, and while I definitely agree, you can turn her chattiness down, although I wish you could just turn her off completely. The moment-to-moment combat here is just really fun, and I love trying out all the different weapons to find a build that I liked best. And in case you couldn't tell, it's an HD 2D game, and once again, it looks stunning. Again, more of a top-down look as opposed to the more side-view games like Octopath Traveler. And while I personally think Octopath Traveler is the best looking HD 2D game so far, I still think Elliot looks awesome, especially with the addition of animated character portraits and cutscenes. The music itself is fitting, but nothing amazing. Again, I feel like Octopath Traveler really outdoes it. Now again, I've heard this game can drag a bit near the end, especially if you're trying to do everything. It feels a little bit samey, but I've loved what I've played so far, and everyone I know that's beat it has really enjoyed it, so I feel like this is an easy recommendation. And at number 1, and maybe a surprise to some, is Monster Hunter Stories 3. I really fell in love with Stories 2, and my wife ended up actually beating it before me because she loved it so much, but 3 elevates the series beyond anything you could have imagined. Stories 2 is pretty limited by the Switch's power, but 3 has been completely unleashed. Characters are now more detailed and more expressive, and the world itself is just huge. Hopping on the backs of one of your monsties, picking a direction, and just going is pure joy. Although I wish your flying monsties could actually fly instead of just glide. The story setup is there's an existential threat to the world, and you work together with another nation on the brink of collapse to find a solution. The story itself isn't exactly award-winning, but there's some fun characters that make the journey worth experiencing. What really makes the game worth playing is the sheer amount of content and monsties to collect. See, Monster Hunter Stories 3 is more like a Pokemon game where you add monsties to your team. It's nothing like the mainline Monster Hunter games. Here it's turn-based instead of action. But unlike Pokemon, where you have the monsties fight on their own, you can actually fight alongside with them. And of course, they have different weaknesses, and you can break parts off the bigger monsties. And what's cool is you can swap weapons that do different things, and you can also swap out monsties mid-battle. Now, I've seen people dismiss this game as nothing more than simple rock, paper, scissors combat, but it's far more than being that simple. Enemies constantly change stances, so you need to be aware of what they're doing and also prepare for their bigger attacks. And the gear system is way more streamlined than the mainline Monster Hunter games. You just make one armor set that covers everything instead of individual pieces. And there's so much character customization here, from how your character looks, their hair, their eyes, and you can also dye your armor, which is cool. I love doing stuff like that in RPGs, so I had a blast customizing my character just how I wanted. And this is a game you can confidently sink your teeth into. Well over 50 hours of core story content, but you can get close to 100 if you want to do absolutely everything that it has to offer. Now, these are awesome, beloved JRPGs everyone seems to be enjoying. However, there are some other JRPGs that critics and even players hate that are actually pretty fun and I think are worth your time. To see those games, watch this video next.